The storm had been building all afternoon, and by the time Samuel Ridge spotted the figure stumbling through the snow, the wind was howling like a banshee across the Wyoming mountain. What he saw made him drop the firewood he'd been carrying. A woman, barely standing, her dark hair matted with ice, limping desperately through the drifts toward his remote cabin. She was still 100 yards away, but even from that distance, he could see she was in serious trouble. Samuel had been living alone in these for 3 years now, ever since the incident in Deadwood that had forced him. He'd chosen this isolated spot precisely because nobody. The nearest town was Copper Falls, a 2-day ride through treacherous terrain that avoided, especially in winter. So seeing anyone out here, especially a woman alone, was likely in gold his coffee. But there she was clearly dying. He rushed toward her, his boots crunching knee-deep snow. As he got closer, he could see the severity of her condition. Her lips were blue, her whole body shaking uncontrollably. Her left leg was clearly injured, causing her to drag it behind her with each agonized. Blood had frozen in dark patterned dress, and her eyes had a look as fighting. "Ma'am," he called out. She didn't seem to hear him over the wind. When he reached her, she collapsed forward into his arms like a rag doll. She was surprisingly light, though he could feel the solid muscle beneath her clothes. Her skin was ice-cold to the touch, and her breathing was shallow and rapid. This woman was minutes away from freezing to death. Without hesitation, Samuel scooped her up and carried her toward his cabin, her head lolling against his shoulder. As he struggled through the snow with her in his arms, questions raced through his mind. What was she doing out here alone? Where had he come from? The nearest ranch was 50 miles away, and the weather had been too dangerous for travel for days. He kicked open his cabin door and rushed inside, immediately carrying her to the fireplace where embers still glowed from the morning's fire. He laid her gently on the thick bear rug and quickly began building. The woman's eyes fluttered open briefly, unfocused and confused, before closing again. "Stay with me now," Samuel murmured, pulling blankets. "You're safe." As he wrapped the blankets around her, he noticed things that struck him as odd. Despite her obvious ordeal, her hands weren't as soft as he'd expect from a frontier woman. There were calluses, but they were in specific places, the kind you'd get from handling firearms regularly. And though her dress was torn and dirty, the fabric was of better quality than most folks in this territory could afford. But those observations faded as he focused on her alive. He heated water and carefully cleaned the wound on her leg, a deep gash that looked like it had come from a fall, probably onto sharp rocks. It would need stitching, but first he had to get her body temperature up. For the next several hours, Samuel worked tirelessly. He removed her frozen outer garments and wrapped her in dry blankets. He prepared warm broth, and slowly, painstakingly, he helped bring her back from the edge. As night fell and the storm continued to rage outside, her breathing finally began to stabilize. It was near midnight when "Where?" Her voice was barely a whisper, rough from the cold. "You're safe," Samuel said, moving closer with a cup of warm broth. "You're in my cabin. I found you in the storm." Her eyes opened fully for the first time, and Samuel was struck by their intensity. They were a deep green, sharp and intelligent, but there was something else there, too, a wariness that seemed almost calculated. For just a moment, those eyes studied him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable, as if she were memorizing every "thank you," accepting the "what's your name, man? What in blazes were you doing out?" She hesitated. Sarah Collins. I was traveling to meet my husband in Copper Falls. My horse threw me and ran off. I've been walking for days." Something about her story didn't sit quite right with Samuel, but he pushed the feeling aside. The woman had nearly died, and she deserved his help regardless of whatever secrets she might be carrying. "Well, Sarah Collins, you're lucky to be alive. That storm's not letting up anytime soon, so you'll be staying here until it passes." Over the next 2 days, as Sarah recovered her strength, Samuel found himself genuinely enjoying her company. It had been so long since he had had anyone to talk to, and Sarah was intelligent and engaging. She asked thoughtful questions about his life in the mountains, about hunting, and about the isolation. She seemed particularly interested in the trails leading down to the valley and the town below. But Samuel began to notice other things, too. Despite claiming to be injured, Sarah moved with surprising grace when she thought he wasn't watching. Once, when he returned unexpectedly from checking his snares, he caught a glimpse of her standing perfectly steady at the window, studying the landscape with what looked like a telescope, though she quickly hid it and resumed limping when she heard him come in. And then there were the questions. Casual, innocent-sounding questions about his past, about why he'd chosen such an isolated spot, about whether he ever had visitors. Nothing too direct but persistent enough to make him wonder. On the third morning, Samuel woke to find Sarah already up, moving quietly. She was dressed in his spare clothes, pants and a shirt that she'd altered to fit her slender frame. Her injured legs seemed to be supporting her weight just fine now. "Feeling better?" he asked, watching her carefully. "Much, thanks." She smiled, but there was something different in her demeanor now, more confident, more alert. "I was thinking I should probably head out today. The storm's past. I'll be worried. Trouble?" "It's much better now." She took a few steps to demonstrate, and Samuel noticed she'd forgotten to favor it at all. That's remarkable healing for such a bad gash. Sarah's eyes met his, and for a moment the mask slipped. There was a hardness there, a professional coldness that made Samuel's blood run cold. Then she smiled again, but this time it didn't reach her eyes. "I heal quickly." Samuel nodded slowly, his hand unconsciously moving toward the Colt. 45. "I'm sure you do. Just like you're probably real good with that Winchester rifle you've been hiding under the bed." The pretense evaporated instantly. Sarah's posture changed, becoming more balanced, more ready. Her right hand moved smoothly to rest on the butt of a pistol that had somehow appeared at her hip. Samuel hadn't even seen her draw it. "You're more observant than I gave you credit for, Samuel." The use of his real name hit him like a physical blow. He'd been going by Sam Miller for 3 years. Only someone who'd done serious research would know his actual identity. "Who are you?" "I told you the truth about one thing. My name really is Sarah Mackenzie, and I really am looking for someone." She paused, her green eyes never leaving his face. "I'm looking for the man who robbed the First National Bank of Deadwood 3 years ago. The man who shot down Sheriff Watson and Deputy Collins in cold blood. The man with a $5,000 bounty on his head." Samuel's blood turned to Deputy Collins. That's why the name she'd given had bothered him. Tom Collins had been the deputy he'd shot during the robbery, though it hadn't been cold blood, and it certainly hadn't been planned. "I think you've got the wrong man, ma'am." "Do I?" Sarah took a step closer, her hand still resting on her weapon. "Because according to my information, Samuel Ridge fled Deadwood on October 15, 1881, after a bank robbery went wrong. He was last seen heading northwest toward the mountain. Local hunters reported seeing smoke from this area regularly for the past 3 years, but nobody's been brave enough to investigate until now." Samuel's mind. This woman, this bounty hunter, had tracked him across 3 years and hundreds of miles of wilderness. She'd deliberately gotten herself injured, or at least appeared to be injured, knowing he'd help her. She'd played the role of helpless victim perfectly, all while gathering intelligence and planning his case. "That's quite a story," Samuel said carefully, "but like I said, you've got the wrong man." "I don't think I do. You see, Samuel, during those long hours while I was recovering, I did some looking around, found some interesting things, like the saddlebag stuffed with bills that don't look quite right for a simple mountain trapper, and that distinctive scar on your left hand, the one mentioned in the wanted poster." Samuel glanced down at his hand, the crescent-shaped scar he'd gotten during the robbery when the banker's letter opener had caught him. He'd forgotten about that detail on the post. "Even if I was this Samuel Ridge fellow, you'd have to get me down the... That's a long, dangerous for one person." "Who says anything about alive?" Sarah's cold. "Dead or alive means dead, and dead is a lot easier to transport." For a moment they stood frozen, each watching, hands near their weapon. The cabin was completely silent except for the crackling of and the drip of... Then Samuel, he dove sideways behind his heavy wooden table just as Sarah's pistol cleared its... Her shot splintered the wood inches. Samuel rolled and came up with his Colt and firing back. Sarah had already moved, using the doorframe for cover. "You're only making this harder on yourself," she called out. "I've got the law on my side." "The law wasn't there in Deadwood. Those men drew first. I was just trying to..." Though he'd never told anyone story. The bank robbery had been a desperate... His wife had been dying of consumption, and the medicine she needed cost more than he could make in 2 years of honest... He'd planned a simple robbery, but Sheriff Watson and Deputy Collins had been waiting. The deputy had shot first, aiming to put Samuel down permanently. Samuel had only returned fire to save his own life, but Sarah's voice held no sympathy. "Tell it to the judge, or tell it to Peter." Another shot rang out, this one closer. Sarah was moving, trying to get a better angle. Samuel realized he was trapped. The cabin only had 2 exits, the main door where Sarah was positioned, and a small back window that was currently blocked by furniture. But then he remembered something. This was his cabin, his territory. He knew every board, every corner, every weakness in the structure. Moving carefully, Samuel reached up and grabbed the rope he used to access the loft storage area. In one smooth motion, he swung himself up into the space above, landing silently on the thick wooden beam. Below, he could hear Sarah moving cautiously in the room, her boots creaking the floorboard. She was good. Her movements were controlled and perfect. But she didn't know the cabin like he did. From his position above, Samuel could see her moving methodically, checking corners, staying low. She'd done this before, clearly, probably more than once. "I know you're up there, Ridge," she called out. "This cabin's not that big. You can't hide forever." Samuel waited, watching her pattern. She was thorough, but perhaps a little too confident. When she moved under the spot where he was hiding, he dropped down behind her. "Drop the weapon." Sarah froze, feeling the barrel of his Colt against the back of her neck. "Easy now, Samuel. Let's not do anything foolish." Slowly, Sarah lowered her pistol to the... But as she straightened up, she spoke without turning around. "You know, Samuel, there's something I didn't tell you about my research." "What's that?" "I know about Mary." The name hit Samuel like a fist to the gut. Mary, his wife, the woman who'd died while he was on the run, the woman whose grave he'd never been able to visit. "I know she died 6 months after the robbery," Sarah continued, her voice softer now. "I know the medicine you needed was for her consumption. I know you tried every legal way to get the money first." Samuel's hand wavered slightly. "Then you know I'm not the cold-blooded killer they made me out to be." "Maybe not, but Tom Collins was my brother." The words hung in the air like gun smoke. Samuel felt the world shift. Deputy Collins, her brother. "He had a family too, Samuel. A wife and 2 children. They've been struggling for 3 years, just like you were struggling before the robbery." Samuel's mind reeled. This wasn't just about bounty money. This was personal. This woman had spent 3 years tracking him, not just for justice, but for revenge. "I didn't want to hurt any," Samuel said quietly, the gun still pointed at Tom. "Drew first. I was just trying to—" "I know," Sarah said, and there was something different in her voice now, something that sounded almost like understanding. "I read the witness statements, all of them. Not just the official reports." Samuel, "What do you mean?" "There were people there that day who saw what really happened, but their statements never made it into the official record. Seems Sheriff Watson had his own reasons for wanting you painted as a killer." Slowly, Sarah began to turn around. Samuel kept his gun trained on her, but he was listening. "Watson was skimming from the bank," continued. "Had been for months. Your robbery would have exposed his books if anyone looked too closely. So he made sure you were painted as a dangerous criminal who needed to be shot on sight, not brought in for trial." "How do you know all this?" "Because when I started tracking you 3 years ago, I thought I was hunting my brother's murderer. But the deeper I dug, the more I realized things weren't what they seemed. Watson died last year. Drank himself to death, but before he did, he confessed to his priest about the money he'd stolen and the evidence he'd buried." Samuel stared at her, trying to process what she was telling him. "So why are you here? Why track me down if you know the truth?" Sarah was fully facing him now, her hands raised, but no longer defensive. "Because there's still a bounty on your head. There are still other hunters looking for you, and because Tom's family deserves to know the truth." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying maybe it's time Samuel Ridge stopped running and started clearing his name." For a long moment he stood there in the weight of hanging, but the wind had whistling through the tree. "Even if what you're saying is true, the witnesses were bought off, scared off years ago." Slowly into her coat pocket and pulled out "This is a sworn statement from Mrs. Henderson, the banker's wife. She saw everything through the window. She's been carrying the guilt for 3 years." Samuel took the paper with his free hand, keeping his gun trained on Sarah. As he read, his hands began to shake. Mrs. Henderson's statement corroborated everything. How Watson and Collins had been waiting in the bank, how they'd planned to eliminate him rather than arrest him, how the deputy had fired first. "Why would you do this?" Samuel asked, looking up at her. "Your brother is still dead." "Because he wouldn't want an innocent man to suffer for something that wasn't his fault. Tom was a good man, Samuel. He believed in justice, not revenge. If he knew what really happened, he'd want the truth to come out." Sarah lowered her hand. "But there's something else. Something I didn't tell you." Samuel tensed again. "I'm not just a bounty hunter. I work for the territorial marshals. I've been trying to clean up the corruption that Watson... Your case isn't the only one where evidence was buried or witnesses silenced." Samuel's gun began to lower slightly. "What are you proposing?" "Come back with me. Face trial." With Mrs. Henderson's testimony and the evidence I've gathered about Watson's corruption, I believe you'll be cleared. More than that, I think you could help us whole network of corruption that's been poisoning law enforcement. And if you're wrong, if they still convict me, Sarah met his eyes steadily, then I'll have failed the first innocent. But I don't think I'm wrong, Samuel. I've spent 3 years on. I know it inside and out. Samuel lowered his gun completely, though he didn't holster. This could be an elaborate trap. A way to get me to come quietly. It could be, Sarah, but ask yourself this. If I wanted to take you by force, would I have told you any of this? Would I have revealed that I know you're not really a killer? She had a point. If Sarah had wanted to take him dead or alive, she could have shot him with chance. Instead, she'd chosen to reveal that. I need time to think about course. But Samuel, there's one more thing There's another bounty hunter heading this, Jack Morrison. He's not interested in the truth, and he's not interested in taking prisoners. If he finds you before you make a decision, you won't get a choice. The name sent a chill. He'd heard of him posed as a lawman, known for bringing in his bounties dead, more often alive. How much time do I have? He's probably 2 days behind me, maybe 3 if the weather slows him down. Samuel nodded slowly, finally holstering his weapon. All right, Sarah Mackenzie, you've given me a lot to think about, but I need to know something first. What's that? Was any of it real? The injury, the helplessness, or was it all an act? Sarah smiled, and for the first time since the truth had come out, it seemed genuine. The injury was real. I really did fall and gash my leg, but she paused, looking almost embarrassed. I may have played up the severity a bit, and the limping lasted longer than it needed. And the rest, the conversation. Samuel found himself unsure how to finish the question. That was real too. I may have come here hunting you, Samuel, but spending these days with you, seeing the kind of man you really are, that changed things for me. They stood there in the afternoon light streaming through the cabin windows, 2 people who'd been on opposite sides of a 3-year hunt, now somehow finding themselves on the same side. I'll need to see all the evidence, Samuel said. All of it. If I'm going to risk my life on this, I need to be sure. Of course. Sarah moved to her pack and began pulling out files, documents, statements. I've got everything here. Take all the time you need. Samuel spent the rest of the day reading through Sarah's evidence. Statement after statement painted a picture of corruption and cover-up that went far beyond his own. Watson had been involved in everything from cattle rustling to claim jumping, using his badge to silence witnesses and eliminate problems. As evening approached, Samuel made his decision. I'll do it, he said. I'll come back with you. Sarah looked up from where she'd been cleaning her rifle. Are you sure? No, Samuel, but I'm tired of running. And if there's a chance to clear my name and stop other innocent people from suffering, I have to take it. They spent that evening planning their route back to Deadwood, discussing strategy for the trial, and preparing for the possibility that Morrison might catch up to them. Sarah proved to be not only intelligent, but also surprisingly tactical in her thinking. She'd clearly planned for multiple contingents. There's something else, Sarah said as they sat by the fire that night. If you're cleared, when you're cleared, what will you do? You can't come back to this cabin. Too many people know about it now. Samuel stared into the flames. He'd been so focused on survival for 3 years that he'd never really thought about what would come after. Start over somewhere, I suppose. Maybe head further west. The territorial marshal's office could use someone like you, Sarah said quietly. Someone who understands what it's like to be on the wrong side of corrupt law enforcement. Someone who won't look the other way when things aren't right. Samuel looked at her in surprise. You're offering me a job? I'm saying there are options, good options, for a man with your skills and your conscience. That night, Samuel slept better than he had in 3 years. For the first time since fleeing Deadwood, he felt like he might have a future beyond just surviving day to day. They set out early the next morning, Samuel's few valuable possessions packed on his horse and the rest left behind. As they rode away from the cabin that had been his refuge, Samuel felt a mixture of fear and hope that was almost overwhelming. Sarah proved to be an excellent traveling companion. She knew the trails, she was skilled at reading weather and terrain, and she was good company. As they rode, she told him more about her investigation, about the other cases she'd worked, about her hopes for cleaning up law enforcement in the territory. You know, Samuel said on their second day of travel, 3 years ago, if someone had told me I'd be riding toward my own trial alongside the bounty hunter who'd tracked me down, I'd have said they were crazy. Quebec Life has a way of surprising us, Sarah agreed. 3 years ago, if someone had told me I'd be trying to clear the name of the man I thought killed my brother, I'd have said the same thing. They were making good time, and Sarah estimated they'd reach Deadwood in 4 more days. But on the 3rd evening, as they were setting up camp in a small canyon, Sarah suddenly grabbed Samuel's arm. "Riders," she whispered, "coming fast." Samuel listened and heard what she'd heard, the sound of multiple horses moving quickly through the night. This wasn't casual travel, this was pursuit. "Morrison?" Samuel asked. "Has to be, and he's brought help." They quickly doused their fire and moved their horses into the shadow of the canyon wall. Sarah checked her weapons while Samuel did the same with his. "How many?" "Samuel, sounds like 3, 4. Sarah's voice was tense but controlled. "Morrison usually works alone unless he's expecting serious trouble, so he knows you're with me. Probably, which means he doesn't trust me to bring you in." The sound of horses grew closer, and soon they could hear voices. Rough, hard voices that carried clearly in the cold night air. "Trail goes into this canyon," one voice said. "Morrison, you sure they came this way?" "Sure." This voice was different, colder, more controlled. "Mackenzie's good, but she's not good enough to hide from me." Samuel and Sarah exchanged glances. Morrison was talking about like she was a problem to be solved, not a fellow law officer. "What if she's really turned?" A third voice. "She's helping him? Then she's no longer useful, and we deal with problems." The meaning was clear, and it sent ice through Samuel's veins. This wasn't about bringing him in. This was about silencing both of them. "Sarah," Samuel urgently, "this isn't just about me anymore. You're in danger, too." "I know. Morrison never trusted. He wanted you brought in dead from the beginning." The horses were at the mouth of the canyon now. Samuel could see the dark shapes moving against the stars. "You know," Morrison carried clearly, "it occurs to me that if Mackenzie and Ridge both died in a shootout, it would save everyone a lot of trouble. No messy trials, no inconvenient questions about Watson's activity." "That's murder, Morrison," Sarah called out, her voice echoing off the canyon. The riders stopped immediately. After a moment, Morrison's laughter rang out, harsh, cold. "Well, well, Sarah Mackenzie, come out where we can see you and bring your boyfriend with you." "I don't think so, Jack. Not when you're talking about convenient accidents. Now, Sarah, that's not very friendly. We're all on the same side here." "Are we?" "Because it sounds like you're planning to solve this case with bullets instead of evidence." Samuel was impressed by Sarah's composure. She sounded calm and professional, even as she positioned herself behind better cover. "Evidence!" Morrison spat. "You always were too soft. Sometimes justice needs a firm hand." "Justice?" Is that what you call ignoring witness statements and covering up corruption?" "I call it practical. Watson may have been crooked, but he knew how to keep the peace. Your way just stirs up trouble." Now Samuel understood. Morrison wasn't just a corrupt bounty hunter. He was part of the same network that had protected Watson. Sarah's investigation threatened all of them. "How many others are involved, Jack?" Sarah called out. "How many badges are for sale in this territory?" "Enough," Morrison replied. "More than enough to handle one idealistic woman and her pet outlaw." Samuel had heard enough. These men weren't here to uphold the law. They were here to protect their criminal enterprise, and they were planning to murder Sarah for getting too close to the truth. "Morrison," Samuel called out, stepping into view with his hands visible but near his weapon. "If you want me, here I am. But the woman doesn't need to be—" "Oh, she does," replied. "She's got too much evidence, too many inconvenient documents. Can't have her testifying about things that are better left buried. The truth really happened. Like a lot of things, you'd be surprised how many outlaws have been eliminated to protect the real criminals." The admission hung in the air like a confession. Morrison had just revealed that Samuel wasn't their first victim. And he wouldn't be there. "You're making a mistake, Jack," Sarah called out. "I filed reports with the territorial marshal before I left. If something happens to me, there will be questions. There are always questions. The trick is making sure the right people answer them." Samuel realized they were out of time for talking. Morrison and his men were going to attack, and they were outnumbered. But they had one advantage. They knew the canyon, having scouted it when they'd made camp. "Sarah," he whispered, "there's a narrow passage about 50 yards back. If we can reach it, they'll have to come at us one at a time. Can you cover me?" "Count on it." What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Sarah moved first, darting from cover toward the passage, while Samuel opened fire, his shots carefully aimed to keep Morrison's men pinned down without hitting them, if possible. He still held hope that this could end without bloodshed. But Morrison had no such compunction. His men returned fire immediately, their bullets striking the rocks around Samuel and sending splinters flying. Samuel rolled to new cover and continued firing, giving Sarah the time she needed to reach the passage. Once she was safely positioned, she began firing as well, her shots just as accurate as his. "You're only making this harder on yourselves. We can wait you out?" "Maybe," called back. "But can you afford to? How long before someone comes looking?" It was a good point. Morrison couldn't afford a prolonged siege any more than that. The standoff continued for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Morrison's men tried twice to advance, but the narrow passage made it impossible for them to use their numbers effectively. Finally, Morrison seemed to reach a decision. "Boys, I think it's time we smoked them out." Samuel heard the sound of glass breaking and smelled kerosene. They were going to try to burn them out of the passage. "Sarah, we need to move. Now." "Where?" "They've got the only exit covered." Samuel looked around desperate. The passage they were in curved back into the canyon wall, but he remembered seeing another opening earlier, higher up the wall. "There," he pointed, "about 20 feet up. If we can climb—" It was a desperate plan, but it was their only option. The smell of kerosene was getting stronger, and they could see the flicker of flames starting to move their way. Sarah went first, her movement sure and quick as she climbed the rocky wall. Samuel followed, covering their retreat as best he could. Below them, the flames were starting to fill the passage. They reached the higher opening just as the fire reached their former position. From their new vantage point, they could see Morrison and his men clearly. More importantly, they now had the high ground. "Jack Morrison," Samuel called out, his voice carrying clearly across the canyon, "you're under citizen's arrest for attempted murder and conspiracy." Morrison, the wall. "You and what authority?" "The authority of the territorial marshal," producing a badge from. "I'm not just working for them, Jack. I am them." "Deputy Marshal Sarah Mackenzie." The revelation seemed to shock Morrison to silence. After a moment he spoke again, but his voice had lost some of its confidence. "You're bluffing." "Am I? Why don't you ride back to town and check my credentials? I'll wait." Samuel could see Morrison's men looking at each other uncertainly. The situation had just become much more complicated for them. "Even if that's true, it's your word against us, and there are more of us." "For now," Sarah. "But I told you, I filed reports, detailed reports about this entire operation. If I don't report in as scheduled, those reports go directly to the territorial governor." Samuel could see that Morrison was beginning to realize his position was becoming untenable. But men like Morrison didn't surrender easily. "Maybe it's time to cut our losses, Jack." "Nobody cuts and runs, Morrison. We finished this." But Samuel could see doubt creeping into his men's faces. They'd signed up to capture a fugitive, not to murder a deputy marshal. "I'm giving you one chance, Morrison," Sarah called out. "Surrender now, and I'll make sure the territorial court hears about your cooperation. If I don't, then you'll face justice one way or another." For a long moment the canyon was silent, except for the crackling of the dying fire. Samuel could practically see Morrison weighing his options. Finally, Morrison made his choice. "Boys," he said to his men, "sometimes you have to know when to fold." To Samuel's amazement, Morrison was surrendering. But as Morrison raised his hands, Samuel caught a glint of metal in the moonlight. The man was palming a hidden weapon. "Sarah, he's got a hideout gun!" Samuel's warning came just in time. Sarah dove sideways as Morrison's concealed derringer fired, the bullet striking the rock where she'd been standing. Samuel didn't. His Colt barked once, and Morrison spun around, clutching his shoulder. The derringer fell from his nerveless fingers. "It's over, Jack," Sarah called out, her rifle now trained on the wounded man. Morrison's companions, seeing their leader down and facing a deputy marshal, quickly threw down their weapons. The fight had gone out of them. What followed was a tense but organized process of taking Morrison and his men into custody. Samuel helped Sarah bind their wounds and secure their weapons while she read them their charges. "Jack Morrison," Sarah said formally, "you're under arrest for conspiracy, attempted murder of a federal officer, and corruption. Your friends here are looking at accessory charges." As dawn broke over the canyon, Samuel found himself in the surreal position of helping a deputy marshal transport prisoners, including the man who'd been hunting him. "What happens now?" Samuel asked as they prepared to continue toward Deadwood. "Now we get these men to trial," Sarah said, "and then we get you to yours." But Samuel, after what happened here, with Morrison's confession about eliminating other outlaws to protect criminals, I think your vindication is guaranteed. And after that, Sarah smiled at him. the same genuine smile he'd seen in his cabin. "After that, Deputy Marshal Ridge, we've got a lot of work to do cleaning up this territory." Samuel stared at her. "Deputy Marshal, the offer stands. The Territorial Marshal's office needs people who understand both sides of the law, people who won't be corrupted by power or intimidated by criminals." As they rode toward Deadwood with their prisoner, Samuel reflected on the incredible turn his life had taken. 3 days ago, he'd been a fugitive hiding in the mountain. Now he was riding toward vindication and possibly a new career enforcing the very laws he'd been accused of breaking. "You know," he said to Sarah as the morning sun climbed higher, 3 years ago, when I carried that limping woman into my cabin, I thought I was just helping someone in trouble. What do you think now?" Samuel looked at the strong, determined woman riding beside, at the badge on her coat, at the prisoners they were escorting toward justice. "Now I think maybe I was the one who needed help, and maybe that woman wasn't as helpless." Sarah's laughter rang across the mountain air, clear and strong and full of hope for the future they would build together. A future where justice meant something, where badges were worn by people who deserved them, and where the truth was worth fighting for. As Deadwood came into view in the distance, Samuel Ridge, soon to be cleared of all charges and possibly soon to be Deputy Marshal Ridge, rode toward his new life with the woman who had tracked him across 3 years and hundreds of miles, not to destroy him, but to save him. The bounty hunter in disguise had indeed been carrying more than she'd let on, but what she'd been carrying wasn't weapons or deception. It was truth, justice, and the promise of redemption for a man who had lost hope of ever being anything more than a fugitive. Sometimes, Samuel thought, the most dangerous people to carry into your cabin are the ones who change your life forever. And sometimes that change is exactly what you need.